My name is Margaret Sheehan, and I'm an artist, and I've been creating art quilts for over 30 years.
Hi, my name is Cindy Heath. I live in Cornish Flat, New Hampshire, and I've been quilting since I was 10 years old. We use the term fiber arts is because historically quilts were not necessarily considered art, but in fact when you look back, a lot of the historical quilts, in particular G's Bend quilts, which were made in the South just from free-form approaches, morphed into specific patterns. But the art of making something and putting something together is, quilting has a continuum of how it's perceived as art. And so it's all the way from making a pattern and putting it together in a traditional way to multimedia, like putting paint on, putting other embellishments like beads and buttons. And so the creative process of creating an art piece is what we do.
We also paint on our fabric, manipulate the fabric. We use unusual materials, and we like to break out of the border sometimes. We're not just doing like taking a template and cutting out and then just sewing a traditional piece. We're grabbing things, and we're in the middle of the process. It's more of an art project of just this goes here and that goes there, and sensing, having a conversation, enjoying the touching, the textile, the surprises. I got inspired to do the sewing and the quilting when my sister had a baby. So I started in my late 20s, and I started just doing, I was living in Montpelier at the time, and I went to this store where they were selling little pieces of Guatemalan fabrics, scraps, and I bought them and thought, oh, I'm going to make something out of this. So I started going to the library and looking at quilting books and putting together a small baby quilt.
What got me started in quilting was my mother, and so we made quilts in the old-fashioned way with clothing scraps and a blanket in between and a sheet on the back. So we made quilts for my brother and I was the one at the sewing machine, and she just inspired me to make things. I made clothing and I made quilts with her for a couple of years until kind of lost interest as a middle schooler. But taking it up again by teaching classes was how I re-entered, and I took a class actually in a sampler quilt, and so I learned all different kinds of blocks, traditional blocks, and then started teaching traditional quilting, and then discovered art quilting, which came on the scene in I want to say the 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s.
Late 70s, yep, that's right.
There was this transition in the textile world from traditional quilts to these art quilts where my first time ever making one, I just threw down a bunch of fabrics that I liked on the table, started sewing them together, and it became a piece. And when I discovered art quilts, that was so liberating because it didn't require precision, and it gave me a whole new experience and a whole new way to look at fabric and putting it together. And that really appealed to me. I love precision as well, but having this other option, right, of just being able to free form what you make is very liberating.
Yeah.
I find inspiration all around me in a number of areas. So I could be walking in the woods and see the array of colors in the fall, and the lines of the trees, the distance of the path. And that might translate into a quilt that just represents fall.
My inspiration comes from fabrics that I've created by myself, because I do a summer surface design time frame where I'm making a bunch of fabrics, printmaking, dyeing, and all of that. And then I just grab things and start having a conversation, seeing things, and it's basically, I call it like when you're rearranging your house and you're moving your couch and all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, it goes right there. You just kind of know. It's that kind of knowing intuitively. I could be working on a piece and then go out to, say, the Hood Museum and see something that, yes, that's the way, and then bring that idea home and and put that into my quilts.
And I mean, I have a big library of art books and quilting books, and I just study those and kind of get a sense of all the different options that are available to me as an artist. And I find inspiration from fellow artists, like Margaret's work is very dynamic, and we have shown our work together a number of times
it
because it's
complements.
just,
Yeah.
it definitely complements
Yeah.
each other. So, inspiration from teachers that I've had, and they bring new techniques to my work.
Mhm.
And so after decades of doing this, you kind of pile all the inspiration into your heart and into your soul, and what emerges is your voice a lot of
That's
times.
right, yeah, your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today I brought to talk about a piece that I made. I call it, these are a few of my favorite things. There are 5 things in here that are the things that I love. One being I'm a very avid cat person. I love my cat. And see if you can guess some of them while I'm mentioning them. Another one is plants. I love plants. I also like to have a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm not sure if you can see that because I'm sitting probably in front of it, but this will be in the show, so you can see it more closely. I love quilting, so I used some commercial fabrics. It was an artist that used cats in her fabrics, so I made sure that there were cats in my quilting, and the cat was sitting on the quilt, which usually does happen. And then I believe the last one is the sun. So that big ball of fire up there is the sun. I used a lot of, this was a breakthrough piece for me as far as I used a lot of new techniques. I was just learning how to free motion quilt. So this is an elaborately free motion quilted piece. I also couched some funky yarns on top and tried to make the eyes and the fur and everything look a little more realistic and fun.
The quilt that I brought here that's going to be in the show is sort of a foray into abstraction, and it represents a garden. It's called In the Garden, and it's just a lot of the different colors of the garden, and there's movement in it to represent wind that goes through the plants. And the quilting is pretty simple, also to represent movement. So it was something that I put together after a workshop I attended on abstraction. And there were a number of techniques that we learned, and so I just employed that. And the idea is to represent flowers and represent the garden.
The rewarding aspects of quilting for me are the actual making. I have found over the period of time that I've been creating the quilt that it's not exactly the quilt that I need, it's the what do you want to call it, the osmosis, I guess, of the creative act. When I'm in the middle of, grabbing a color or deciding something, and it's like I'm in a place that there's no noise and there's nothing else, it's just me and the art. And I love that. When I meet a person who's looking at my work and they're really enjoying it, they're just like they can't believe it, they're absorbed in the colors and the shapes and all that. Watching them react to what I've made, that gives me such great pleasure. Really nice that I can move someone so deeply with a piece of art that I've made, that I have actually enjoyed making. So that, I think, is the real rewards for me.
I think what I find rewarding is being able to take an idea and then get into the construction process and deciding how to translate that idea into fabric. And then the other thing I find very rewarding is similar to Margaret, where I love to be at a show and just sort of hope people don't know who I am and hover like a fly on the wall and listen to people's responses, because you do not know how people are going to react.
Yeah.
You make something that comes from your heart, and it's going to touch some people, it's not going to touch other people, and that is something that's very rewarding to have recognized that that's going to happen, that you don't judge your work based on people's responses to it necessarily, but it is very, very rewarding to know that people are touched by it.
So some of the books that influenced me as an artist, as a quilt maker, I brought two that I thought were interesting. This is a book I bought it at a yard sale, and you can still see the initial tracing paper from when I first got it. And when I found this book, it was taking the traditional piecing, but allowing you to design different quilts. So like in here is like this little tracing paper drawings of things that you could do from this book that I could have pulled out and made based using the traditional pattern. So I started out, creating this way and learning how to put things together with tracing paper and coloring. But this was also offered as a coloring book, so you could color right in the book if you wanted to. But it gave different varieties of things. It gives you all the information of what you need, how many you need for a certain quilt, size quilt. And this sort of was a dynamic entry for me. These were borders that you could create too. This one was one of my favorite books here at the Howe Library, which was discarded a while back, and I was able to snatch it up. This also gave me encouragement that there were artists that were creating and leaving. Like this one, there's a whole bunch of threads that have been left out. And I think more of the palette is back here of the artists. They were doing unique and interesting things. A lot of these people were artists, and maybe they were painters, and found that making a quilt and then even using actual acrylic paints on the surface, they were doing unusual things. And that was just so exciting for me. I realized today when I was pulling this off my shelf, I've studied with 5 of the people that are in this book. That's how amazing this book was. So I do know the Howe Library has a fabulous collection of quilt books. So there are things like this that can influence you if you decide to pursue a passion.
When you're learning, you're always learning, always wanting to discover new techniques and from people that practice at the highest level of the craft and the art. And so Sue Benner, who's a Texas fiber artist, has been a big inspiration. Her work has evolved to being quite large and very, very just impressive on its scale.
Vibrant too.
Vibrant,
beautiful.
Right. She's a microbiologist by training, so a lot of her work has science messaging and science imaging. Also, Jane Dunawall, who is also in Texas, is a fiber artist. And the thing that I love the most is that, there are people that I know who are in their 90s still making art and still creating and still challenging themselves to the next thing. Mm-hmm. And so art, like writing, like reading, like any of the things that we can do for a lifelong experience, art is one of those things that you can just do from cradle to grave, which is just wonderful.